So we're going to go over different types of perfect squares, and we're going to see what perfect squares are. The definition of a perfect square is the product of an integer multiplied by itself. So that means that if you have an integer is going to be a whole number. So if you have a whole number such as 4, you're going to multiply 4 times 4, and that will give you 16. So 16 is your perfect square because it's the product of 4 times 4. We call it a perfect square because right here you have an exponent of 2. Whenever you have an exponent of 2, we call that square. So if it was x to the second power, we call that x squared. 4 to the second power is 4 square. So 4 square creates a perfect square of 16 square. Now, you need to know your perfect squares. You need to know which numbers are perfect squares because that's going to be used in different aspects. We're going to start with the basics. So 1 to the second power. So 1 times 1 gives you 1. 2 to the second power. So 2 times 2 gives you 4. 3 to the second power gives you 9. 4 to the second power gives you 16. And 5 to the second power gives you 25. So those are the first 5, but those are not the only ones you're going to need. You are also going to need 6 to the second power, which is going to give you 36. Then you have 7 to the second power, which gives you 49. You have 8 to the second power, which gives you 64. 9 to the second power is equal to 81. And 10 to the second power is equal to 100. The higher you go in math, the more numbers you need to know. And in this case, for perfect squares, we need to make sure that we know our perfect squares all the way to 15. So you need to look at a number and know if that number is a perfect square or if it's not. So 11 times 11 is going to give you 121. Then you also have 12 to the second power, or 12 square, and that's going to give you 144. 13 to the second power is going to be 169. 14 to the second power gives you 196. And 15 to the second power is going to give you 225. So just looking at the numbers, you should be able to tell which one is a perfect square. And again, the perfect squares are going to be this group on the right side. So 6 is not a perfect square, but we know that 36 is a perfect square. 13 is not a perfect square, but we know that 169 is a perfect square. Something that I want you to remember though is that negative numbers can also give you perfect squares. Because if you have negative 6 times negative 6, that's going to give you a positive 36. So 36 is a perfect square from the product of 6 times 6, or also negative 6 times negative 6. Sometimes you look at multiplication charts and you see that there's a line that is highlighted. So in this case, we have these numbers in yellow. We know that those numbers are the product of 4 times 4 gives us 16. If we look at this one, this is the product of 7 times 7. So that's how we're getting that number. So we know that that line that we get is usually to highlight your perfect squares. You also have perfect cubes. The definition of a perfect cube is the product of an integer. So we're talking about a whole number. It could be positive or negative. When you multiply that number by itself 3 times. So in a perfect square, it was 4 times 4. For a perfect cube, you're going to have 4 times 4 times 4. So again, a perfect cube will be 4 times 4 times 4. And we call this 4 cubed, and that's going to be equal to 64. You're going to encounter that some numbers are perfect squares and perfect cubes, but not every single perfect cube is also a perfect square. Now, the list of perfect cubes is going to be extensive, but we are not going to focus on too many. We're only going to pay attention to 10 because that's going to simplify our job. So the first one is going to be 1 to the third power. So 1 times 1 times 1 gives you 1. 2 to the third power, that's going to be 2 times 2, which is 4, times 2, that's 8. 3 to the third power, you have 3 times 3, which is 9, times 3 gives you 27. 4 to the third power gives you 64. 5 to the third power gives you 125. We also have 6 to the third power gives you 216. 7 cubed is going to be 343. 8 cubed is 512. 9 to the third power gives you 729. And 10 to the third power gives you 1000. So those are the perfect cubes you need to remember.